Groundhog's Day. Let's try this one more time. I hated that last video, and that video went way, way, way too long for the subject matter. I would have a conversation about the AOC issue. Jimmy Dore, comedian, he's on YouTube, many of you know who he is, basically comes out with a political idea. And his point is Nancy Pelosi wants to get elected to leader. Great, leader of the House, Speaker of the House. Well, if she wants to be Speaker of the House, she needs to get the votes of her party. Great. Dore makes the point of saying, how many members are of the Progressive Caucus? Let's say 100. Well, if the margin of her winning is less than that, why can't you use leverage to pressure her to basically allow a vote on Medicare for all? Now, AOC hears this, but she hears it in this kind of grapevine way and answers in a roundabout way. But I think she's wrongheaded in her assessment of this. And I kind of want to talk about why I think she's wrongheaded. Because she seems to be under this idea that if she is more docile, if she is more unconditionally supportive, that somehow the party that reviles her so much so that she even talked about potentially leaving herself and said that I was not the enemy, that believes that that party will somehow become nicer to her or to the Progressive Caucus or to progressive priorities, despite the fact that for the last 40, 50 years, the left has been unconditionally supportive, has been docile, and has been basically sycophants, the political equivalent of an abused spouse. Beat him, smack him, slap him, have sex with the maid, not wash your hands and make a ham sandwich and give it to the kid, all that stuff. And looks at you and says, baby, nobody will love you. You better stay. And the left says, okay. That has been that way for the last 40, 50 years. So if there is even a whiff of the party or members of the party or elements of people who are progressive or progressive Democrats having this conversation about what should be done and how do you get across leverage, even if you have to start at a very tiny, tiny, small point to do it, even if you lose the vote in and of itself, the very fact that you were able to cobble together a force and leverage to compel the vote isn't in of itself productive. Just this. Whether you win it or lose it is almost immaterial to the fact that you get Democrats on the record for it, but you also were able to use political clout to get a political objective accomplished. That in and of itself is a success, whether or not you lose the Medicare for all vote. I want to go into more of this because Dore has been getting dumped on by the Cedar sycophants of the world. But he's also been getting a lot of support by people who I think are pretty bright, like Brianna and, myself, but also Aaron Mattei and Glenn Greenwald. I mean, there's been this kind of real loud fight about this. Dore was even trending on Twitter yesterday. The wild part about this is it seems that many of these people who've been in the Democratic Party for the last 40, 50 years, and some of these people who are left, and they have this kind of magical idea that the Congress is going to change, or that there's going to be one magical day where all of it changes, as opposed to technical maneuvers, things that you have to do to build up moves over and over and over again to kind of build up institutional support and build up muscles and political legitimacy, none of which are things that the left can muster at this moment. I'm going to show you AOC's argument against this, and I'm going to try to be brief and succinct, unlike the last video, and try to explain why I think her arguments are wrong and why I think there is value and legitimacy to this particular plan of action, especially if it gets across to the rest of the left that they can do and it sets a precedent, even if it's a minor one. The fact that it was set in and of itself matters, especially considering the last 40 or 50 years of inaction by this aspect of the political spectrum. Yes, Tina didn't eat the cake. Yes, they got into a fight, but Tina became something in and of herself. I'm saying that the left had the opportunity in 2020 to be something else. The civil war that is taking place right now is a long time in the making. And unfortunately, at least on this topic, I think AOC gets it wrong. There's a difference between what you see sitting on the board and what you see sitting on the side of the board. And sitting inside of it, you have all sorts of threats and everything else that avail you. And it's very possible that if I was in AOC's position, I may take somewhat of the same position of let's say, a conservative position of not necessarily wanting to take the risk. By the same token, I'm not sitting on the side of the board. I'm out here with all of those other people that are seeing everything that's taking place around in our society, especially the United States, and seeing how both parties, specifically the Democratic Party, has failed miserably. The fact that we have to even have a fight about trying to get Medicare for all up for a vote when 70-something% of Democrats, 88% of Democrats and like 70% of the American public agrees with it. In the midst of a pandemic where 300,000 people have died, 20 or more million people don't have health care, and 30 million are out of a job. We have to fight to get Medicare for all passed. That's obscene. And so when these people are out there and they're pushing you and they're pushing the Progressive Caucus to do something, they're not wrong. They're dead on in regards to being right about something needing to be done, and about leverage and action in and of itself begets additional leverage, additional action, and political legitimacy. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. My name is the Progressive Soapbox, or my name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity for allowing me to do it. AOC, liberal superstar, social democratic superstar. I like AOC. Her policy positions and everything else under normal circumstances I like. Don't particularly like things she says on foreign policy, but no one is perfect. I guess I just want to make the point that I do like her. I just disagree with her on this. Disagreement is not necessarily throwing somebody away or canceling them. It's just a disagreement. I disagree with the position that the Progressive Caucus can't be more aggressive. AOC says, problem with this idea is there isn't enough thought given to step 2. The Democrat votes aren't there yet, and with a razor-thin margin, the Democrat knows are greater than the margin of victory. So you issue threats, hold your vote, and lose. Then what? You want to look at who's opposed to the co-sponsor list? So in contrast, you can use leverage to push things that can happen and change lives, i.e. $15 minimum wage vote in 100 days, elevating longtime progressive champions to important positions of leadership. Also doable. That's the opportunity cost to weigh. I love that. Basically, they can punish us. They can punish us. I love that thought. That thought is fascinating to me because it's as if you've acted as if they've been fair and great to you now. Do you believe that the $15 minimum wage is something that is for us as opposed to for America? That Joe Biden will punish the left and punish America because the left had the temerity to demand anything because they haven't demanded anything at this point. Let me tell you something. A demand is not after the fact you just say, okay, a demand has a consequence. People use and throw the term demand all around, just like they throw the term theory, when really what they're talking about is hypothesis. No, oftentimes these things are not demands. I'm talking about a demand that has explicit consequence with an explicit material gain on top of it. The $15 minimum wage, as far as I know, this was something that Joe Biden was talking about pushing anyway. I don't see what that would have to do with your and the left strategy of trying to get something accomplished or force a vote from the standpoint of Pelosi. As for long-term progressive leadership positions, something that you think you can get. Look, let's be clear. When they were calling you racist, sexist, uniquely belligerent to women, when they were pretending as if minorities within the context of the Bernie Sanders movement didn't exist, were you being docile? Did that stop them from doing that? No, it didn't stop them from doing that at all. When you were being docile, and for the last 40, 50 years, being basically sycophants and backing whatever the Democratic Party says, did that stop them from cheating you in 2016? Or for that matter, turning around immediately and doing it again in Iowa? Not in the least. It didn't stop them from shutting down your polling locations. Didn't stop them from knocking, 200,000 people off the voter rolls in New York. And when Biden finally won, what happened? He put in one creature after the next in the position, even in the Democratic primary. How valued were you? Not at all. You got, 1 minute of speaking time where they brought a bunch of Republicans on stage to attack you and basically castigate the left. I'm making the point that your docility, or the lefts or progressives, being sycophants, basically backing whatever random Democrat that comes along in this kind of cultish blue no matter who or have nowhere else to go behavior. Unconditional support hasn't helped your cause. It hurts your cause. Understand, over the last 40, 50 years, they've gotten so accustomed to blacks and lefties just voting reflexively Democrat that Biden could literally look another black man in the face and say, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. Or tell pretty much a lefty who's talking about climate change, go vote for the other guy. I'm saying this is where your politics is. You guys have gotten so accustomed to basically not pushing, not using leverage, being willing to accept anything, that they've been accustomed to you being willing to accept anything. You have no political legitimacy from the standpoint of weight, from the standpoint of the progressives or the left. And it shows, and everything, it oozes out of them. Joe Biden putting in all of these creatures. I mean, you're talking about like these people who are Raytheon, and just because they're multicolored people, the media looks at them in a particular way. But lefties realizes this is a revolving door. This is a swamp. What impetus, what power do you have to stop him from doing it? Zero. You made no demands in the beginning of the election. And even after the election, you were shocked and chagrined when he starts basically ignoring you and putting people into positions that you abhor. But again, no power. I'm trying to make this point that you being docile, you being a sycophant, you backing whatever random Democrat that comes along hasn't necessarily sweetened your lot from their point of view. And if anything, it allows them to rationally take you for granted. I'm using the election as an example because I'm trying to show an allegory between the use of leverage in an election in order to try to get a candidate to appropriate your positions, but being willing to let them lose when they don't. With the Nancy Pelosi issue and this quibble over what to do and whether or not to use leverage to try to get results. If nothing else, using leverage gets across to people that that's something that should have taken in 2020, that was a mistake that wasn't used in 2020. All of those progressive groups, Bernie Sanders goes tits up. You have all of these progressive groups, Sunrise Movement, the works, like 20 of them. And none of them could get the Democrats to appropriate a position, and honestly didn't even try. It's not so much that my argument was to let Biden to get Trump win or to put Trump in office. My argument was that regardless of who was on the other side, it's still the responsibility to hold your political candidate accountable with the notion and the potential for that guy to lose. If you don't have that ability to lose, you get Joe Biden. Basically, I'm going to get in office. You have no entanglements on me. Yeah, we need to deal with austerity. I may do a public option, a little bit more around Obamacare. I mean, that's basically what you get. Nothing, because you demanded nothing, because you were so terrified, or just went along with the party dynamic to the detriment of all of us and to the detriment of negotiations going forward, because that's one more feather in the cap of losing any level of political legitimacy or weight. The action is less relevant about whether you win. What matters is that you get the Democratic Party on the record. What matters is that you are able, meaning the Progressive Caucus, to come together and to force a vote on a particular issue. It doesn't even have to be Medicare for all. It's the action that matters. It's the leverage that matters. It's the getting people accustomed to the precedent that you can actually use leverage in politics on the left to accomplish real material gains. By the way, what is the Progressive Caucus? What are you? And what I mean by that is there anything unique to you from an ideological standpoint? Or is it just, I need to pay money in order to get my name in this list? Because ultimately, this is once more Democratic Party using the term progressive as a prop in order to hide their own corporate malfeasance. And maybe there's time for that to stop. Maybe the Progressive Caucus should have an ideological dimension to it. Maybe if you call yourself a Progressive Caucus, there should be something progressive about the caucus. And progressive is more than just standing somewhere looking a particular way. It's what you do. It's what you do. What are you pushing for? What do you believe in? What are you throwing yourself on the flag for? That's your political identification. What these guys are often doing, it seems, to basically put money, and then they can put their name as progressive to get some kind of credit that they don't necessarily deserve. And maybe that's where the rub is. The power and legitimacy in the Democratic Party from the standpoint of the left or standpoint of progressives is always curtailed because it's not really real. that the Progressive Caucus is a chimera. It's a mirage, an illusion of sorts. And that the focus on AOC to basically carry this burden, yes, is to some degree unfair. And yes, if you were in her position, there are all sorts of threats and there are all sorts of things and caveats that she may look and say, yeah, this is not going to work. I don't necessarily see how that worked. But the people outside of the board are not wrong for making this point that something needs to be done. There needs to be some show of leverage in our politics. And the action in and of itself gets across success. Especially considering the 50 years of inaction and failure. Look, at some point, the party needs to be held accountable and political leaders need to be held accountable. You get my vote when you represent my interests. And that should be true in whatever election you're in, whether that's in the leadership contest election or whether that's us. And unfortunately, for the last 40, 50 years, the left has had this horrible way of just voting for any random Democrat because they were terrified of what the Republican is. But they missed the point that Democrats, liberals, don't do this. Only you. The same argument of Donald Trump is a maniac, you have to vote for him, is also the same argument of, well, no, it seems like you have to appropriate policy that gets people to vote for him. There's a difference in those things. Is Joe Biden really willing to let the country tank to a man that they're calling the apocalypse, as opposed to appropriating Medicare for all that has 70-something% support on election night? Is Pelosi? Is Schumer? The answer is, for all three of them, yes. For the left, the answer tends to be no. And that's unfortunate because it's not your responsibility to basically keep Trump out of office. It's also theirs. And it's theirs in the context of representing policy that is in the interest of the American public. And until you get to the point where you're willing, able to set a demand of you're going to represent this or fail, nothing changes. That's the honesty of it. There's no magic to it. Either you get to the point where you can show political weight, political legitimacy, and so forth, or not. The Democratic Party put in the DSCC and the DCCC literally went out the way to try to attack organizations that would help lefties like AOC, Ilhan Omar get in office. Think about that. Like, they fully and clearly understand that you are not on the same side. And in understanding this, they treat you as if you're not on the same side. This vote, at the very least, gets across that the left finally is beginning to understand that. They finally understand that they have political agendas and things that in order to get the policies that you want passed, they have to be out of office. Those dinosaurs need to be primaried. I guess I'm trying to make the point that when these guys are in their political space, we're not on the same side. Democrats fully get we're not on the same side. And when they act and they do certain things, either in the primaries, like the DSCC and the DCCC, basically attacking to prevent people like Ilhan Omar or AOC from getting in office again, or whether they purge the party of Sanders supporters, meaning in the primary after they lost in 2016, or whether Biden, who basically puts a bunch of dinosaurs and a bunch of swamp creatures in his cabinet. It bespeaks of the same. There's a problem on the left with legitimacy, leverage, and with the understanding of politics. And I'm sorry, this is not it. Meaning this notion of, oh, we have to be nicer to Democrats, and I can't necessarily find move two. It's not always a move two. Sometimes there are technical moves that you do because it improves your position. That position with the crowd out there, your position with members from the standpoint of the left. And I have to be honest, all sorts of things you're going to do are going to piss off Democrats. All sorts of positions you can say are going to piss off Democrats. There's never going to be a position where you are going to be amenable to them with the exception of when they can use you to leverage other lefties. I would say remember that. Because this is not a situation, this is a crossroads. And this is, for the first time in a very long time, where the left has finally started to pick a fight. And they started to get into their heads, leverage is what needs to be leveled. And in that case, they're talking about using it against Pelosi. How can I be against it? How can I be against it? I'm just hoping that that notion of leverage in politics, this notion of using one thing that somebody wants in order to get something else that you and your group wants, and being able to use that to the tune of numbers and being brave enough to use it, not being cowardly in using it, and being able to developed a political legitimacy. That's what I want the left to be able to do. When the left gets to the point of saying you're going to lose without backing a particular policy, I want them to believe it. And right now, nobody does. Look, I don't know if AOC is going to, or these guys, the progressive group, they're probably not going to push back against Pelosi. But whether or not they should, Shane and I had to really get back and forth on it. I think all things being equal, they should. You need to show out for your group. You need to show that you have some leverage in the political space and that you can push that leverage. And I think the problem is basically that leverage is not there. Once Joe Biden got elected, that was it. The leverage is there to some degree for Nancy Pelosi, but the problem becomes the rest of the Progressive Caucus. And like I said, you might have the squad, but the Progressive Caucus, those guys just had to pay money to get in. That's not necessarily indicative of power from the standpoint of the left. So it's an interesting dilemma. No, I don't think those things are challenged. We need the $100, the minimum wage, and those type of things. Whether the seating positions, yes. But let's be very clear. It wasn't as if Joe Biden was treating you and the left rosily before all of this. And if, under normal circumstances, he's apathetic towards you. I can't even call it belligerently hostile. It's worse. It's just apathy. What do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? I mean, look, there needs to be a point where the public realizes that the left is on the case. Meaning it's a fundamentally new way of looking at this. And unfortunately, I think the Progressive Caucus has been so diluted that it's probably impossible to ever get that sort of focus. And I don't think 5 or 6 people gets it. In order for anything to get done from the standpoint of law, you're going to have to get some of those people out of office or have leverage to use against them. And if you're not willing to use it against Pelosi, and I'm talking about Progressive Caucus, who are you willing to use it against? And when? Since you weren't willing to do it with the election. You had 42% of people making $18,000 a year before this pandemic. And those people at the bottom got slaughtered. Before Obamacare was put in, 26 million people didn't have health care after Obamacare? And that's another 14 million people that lost it since COVID. And still, with numbers like that, and with 70% on election night saying they were for Medicare for all, like 74%, 88% of Democrats, you still can't get it over the finish line. Then there has to be an honest appraisal from the standpoint of blacks and from the standpoint of the left of why you have such numbers in the Democratic Party and yet compel no power. And I would put to you that it has everything to do with cowardice and lack of leverage. Having all of those numbers is leverage, but it's leverage that you have to be willing to use. And what they know, at the very least what they believe, is that the blinders that they can put on you is you have nowhere else to go.